Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Costigan, and I will be presenting the second half of the webinar today. Let's start with piping release detection requirements. Did you know that your piping also requires release detection? Without piping release detection, how do you know if your petroleum product is staying in your pipes or if it is leaking? This slide has a picture of a pipe that had product leaking from the inside and degraded the pipe from the inside out. This ultimately caused petroleum product to leak into the surrounding soil. Therefore, it's important to make sure you have piping release detection to prevent releases or to detect them quickly to minimize any impact to the environment. What are the requirements for piping release detection? Well, there are two types of piping: pressurized piping and suction piping, and each type of piping has its own requirements. Pressurized piping needs two types of release detection. All pressurized systems must have a line leak detector monitoring each line at a 3 gallon per hour rate. In addition to the line leak detector, facilities that have pressurized piping must also have another form of piping release detection. They can choose either a 30-day release detection method that measures at 0.2 gallon per hour rate or an annual tightness test measuring at 0.1 gallon per hour. And while it's not a release detection method, it's important to mention that these facilities must also have shear valves installed for each line. These can be visually verified by an investigator when they visit the facility. The other type of piping is called suction piping. This type of piping only needs one form of release detection. They can either choose a 30-day monitoring method that tests at a 0.2 gallon per hour rate or a tightness test every 3 years that measures at 0.1 gallon per hour. Whatever method you choose, make sure it's conducted in accordance with third-party certification requirements. The pressurized piping systems must keep the following records to prove compliance. All facilities with pressurized piping must have an annual line leak detector function test to ensure that these devices are able to detect a 3 gallon per hour leak. Additionally, these facilities must keep records to show compliance with their second piping release detection method. This could be any of the following listed on this slide. The most common method is the annual piping tightness test. Alternatively, these facilities could choose one of the 30-day release detection methods, such as vapor or groundwater monitoring, interstitial monitoring, SIR with inventory control, or an electronic leak monitor. There are quite a few options, so make sure to keep records to prove you are in compliance with the release detection method you choose. For facilities with suction piping systems, they need to keep records to show compliance with their one piping release detection method that they choose. This could include any of the following: a 3-year piping tightness test record, or one of the 30-day release detection methods, including vapor or groundwater monitoring, interstitial monitoring, or SIR with inventory control. Now, there is a certain type of suction piping that has a high mounted check valve located on the suction line. This type of piping does not require piping release detection because the product will not stay in the piping. If you have this type of suction piping, you must provide documentation or as-built drawings to prove that you have this type of piping. It's not very common, so it's important to have this documentation to prove compliance during an investigation. If you want a short summary of these requirements, you're in luck. You can look at the piping release detection section in the underground storage tank compliance notebook, and you will find this table, which summarizes the release detection methods for piping. It has the piping release detection method on the left that requires the required records in the middle and the monitoring frequency on the right. The next two slides are examples of line leak detector annual function tests. Remember, the line leak detector is a requirement for all pressurized piping systems. This is a mechanical, non-electronic line leak detector function test result, which checked 3 piping lines, each separate line leak detector, and luckily, they all say pass. This picture is an example of an electronic line leak detector test. And notice the line leak detector has a 3 gallon per hour leak check rate. This slide shows a passing piping tightness test. Remember that for piping tightness tests, it is an option for pressurized piping systems every year or for facilities with suction piping every 3 years. Now, as for the other 30-day release detection methods, including groundwater vapor monitoring, SIR with inventory control, you can use the same examples that are in the compliance notebook under the tank release detection section. The photo on this slide shows 3 shear valves. There are 3 lines, each with their own shear valve. The investigator will visually verify to make sure that these are properly anchored, and here they are anchored with a metal crossbar. Moving on to the next section in the compliance notebook, we are going to discuss the requirements for spill prevention equipment and overfill devices. The photos on this slide show the tight fill fitting on the left, the spill bucket in the middle, and a fill port cap that goes over the fill tube on the right. This equipment ensures that your system is liquid tight during product transfers and minimizes any chances of water and debris from going into your tanks. These are just some of the spill and overfill prevention requirements facilities must maintain. Here is a helpful summary of all the spill and overfill equipment requirements. You can find this table in the Underground Storage Tank Compliance Notebook, Spill and Overfill Prevention section. If you look at the table, the column on the left is the type of equipment. The column in the middle explains the required records for that type of equipment. And the column on the right explains the frequency that you should be maintaining this type of equipment. We'll be covering the spill bucket requirements, different requirements for containment sumps, and requirements for overfill prevention. Let's start with the requirements for your spill prevention equipment. Facilities are required to have a tight fill fitting, making it liquid tight between fueling transfers. Facilities must also have a liquid tight spill bucket to catch spills and prevent debris and liquids such as rainwater from going into the tank. Starting January 1st, 2021, all facilities had to meet new requirements, which increased the frequency of spill prevention equipment inspections. Now, spill buckets must be inspected for integrity every 30 days, and debris and liquid found in the spill bucket must be removed within 96 hours. Additionally, these new rules added a 3-year tightness test requirement to spill prevention equipment. The tightness testing can be conducted using vacuum, pressure, or liquid testing in accordance with manufacturer guidelines, a code of practice, or a low liquid level test method. If the spill prevention equipment is double walled, then those facilities have an option to have the double walled spill prevention equipment during the 30-day walkthrough inspections, but they do not have to conduct tightness testing. It's important that these facilities with double-walled spill buckets have documentation to show their spill prevention equipment is double-walled and included on the 30-day walkthrough inspection, so they can opt out of the 3-year tightness testing requirement. All containment sumps, submersible turbine pumps, and under dispenser containment areas must also be periodically monitored every year. Now, the type of sump determines how you should conduct this annual inspection. For example, if your facility that has a containment sump with interstitial monitoring, you need to check for leaks in the interstitial area, remove any liquid or debris within 96 hours, and make sure it's properly disposed of. If your facility has a containment sump not using interstitial monitoring, or they're uncontained, you need to check for damage to equipment, releases to the environment, and corrosion protection for any metal components that contain product while also surrounded by soil or water. In addition to these annual inspections, any containment sumps used for interstitial monitoring of piping, where interstitial monitoring is the primary form of release detection, those sumps must also be tested for tightness every 3 years using vacuum, pressure, or liquid tightness testing. However, if these containment sumps used for interstitial monitoring are double-walled, and the facility can choose to monitor these containment sumps during the 30-day walkthrough inspection without conducting the 3-year tightness test. And keep in mind that when you do any repairs to your spill or overfill equipment, it must be tested within 30 days of the repair to show that it is working properly. To prove you are in compliance, make sure to keep records of the spill prevention equipment inspection that is being completed within the 30-day time frame. If you find liquid, soil, or debris during the inspection, make sure to remove it within 96 hours and keep documentation to show proper disposal. If your facility has single-walled spill buckets, you also need to conduct and keep records of the 3-year tightness test. If your facility has double-walled spill buckets and you are not conducting the 3-year tightness test, make sure that the spill buckets are inspected during the 30-day walkthrough and that you have documentation to show your equipment is double-walled. As for sumps, remember all sumps, submersible turbine pumps, and under dispenser containment areas must be inspected on an annual basis. Be sure to keep documentation to prove compliance with this annual inspection. Any sumps used with interstitial monitoring of piping, where interstitial monitoring is the primary release detection method, these sumps need to be tightness tested every 3 years or be double-walled and included in the 30-day walkthrough inspection. All of these records must be kept for at least 5 years. If your facility conducts the tightness test with liquid tightness testing, the resulting liquids must be managed appropriately. Some options for disposal are discussed on this slide. While the liquids can be reused for further liquid testing in other sumps at the same or at a different facility, you will eventually have to dispose of the test liquid. One option is to capture, pump, and haul it for proper disposal at an authorized wastewater treatment plant. You need to check with them and ask if they will accept the wastewater first. You can ask your municipality for information about the nearest wastewater treatment plant, or you can search for the nearest outfall on the TCEQ outfalls map. The map only provides the name and permit information about the facility, so you will need to do a little research to find their contact information and to ask if they will accept this test water. If you would like assistance with this, you can also call the Small Business Hotline to get help from a compliance specialist. Other options for disposal include discharging these to waters of the state in accordance with the water quality general permits, either the hydrostatic test water general permit or the petroleum fuel or petroleum substances general permit. It's extremely important that if you do discharge under either of these general permits, that you understand the specific requirements to discharge your test water. For additional information, see the TCEQ webpage, Available Water Quality General Permits, which is listed on this slide. Here is an example of a spill bucket inspection document that you can use to record your spill bucket inspection. Remember to inspect the condition of the spill bucket, look for cracks, liquid and debris, and remove it within 96 hours. This inspection should be conducted every 30 days. This is an example form for containment sump inspections. These inspections are conducted annually, and you're checking the integrity of the sumps, if they're damaged, if there's any leaks to the environment, or releases, just like the spill bucket inspection. And remove any liquid or debris found within 96 hours and properly dispose of it. And this is example documentation for proper disposal spill bucket waste. Remember, you must keep documentation for the past 5 years to show your compliance with these regulations. For overfill devices, facilities have two options for compliance. The first option is the automatic shutoff device, also known as the flapper valve, which should be set to activate at 95% capacity. The second option for compliance is a flow restrictor, which is also known as a ball float. This should be set to activate at 90% capacity. Keep in mind, this activation level varies on the type of overfill device you have and if the overfill device is equipped with an audible or visible alarm. On this slide, I want to highlight a couple new requirements for overfill devices. Facilities are no longer able to repair or replace flow restrictors after September 1st, 2018. If you currently have a flow restrictor, you can continue to use it until it requires being repaired or replaced. At that point, you will need to install an automatic shutoff device. The other requirement is a 3-year test on overfill devices to check that they are working properly and will activate at the appropriate level. All facilities should have conducted their first 3-year overfill test by January 1st, 2021. After the initial test, all facilities must retest their overfill equipment every 3 years. Since record keeping is the name of the game, let's discuss what records you need to document compliance with overfill prevention. If you have an automatic shutoff device, which is pictured on the left of this slide, this device is in the fill port or fill tube, so it can be visually verified by an investigator. However, it's always a good idea to keep installation records, which may also prove that the device is set at the appropriate level. Within 30 days of a repair, you must test the equipment to ensure it's operating properly, so keep records of any repairs and 3-year test results. The flow restrictor, which is pictured on the right of the slide, is in the vent line and it's harder to see. That means installation records should be kept as proof that your facility meets the overfill prevention requirements. Have the 3-year testing results and keep those records as well. Keep in mind that this overfill device cannot be repaired or replaced after September 1st, 2018. Now, the next section in the compliance notebook discusses reporting suspected releases. Looking at the picture in this slide makes me think that this may be something that's reportable to the TCEQ. A suspected release occurs when a facility receives a failed or inconclusive release detection result. This could be the 30-day ATG or SIR reports, or interstitial monitoring and secondary containment sensors are not normal, or if inventory control fails for 2 consecutive 30-day periods. You need to report this information to the TCEQ and take steps to figure out what is going on with your system. If your facility experiences a suspected release, you need to report this information to the TCEQ Remediation Division within 24 hours. You must mention the date of the suspected release, the date the owner and operator became aware of the release, and you can call or fax this information on the TCEQ's incident report form. After your initial report, you need to investigate why you have a suspected release by conducting a system tightness test within 30 days to determine if a leak does exist. The owner or operator must file a second report which contains a detailed description of the investigative procedures taken. It must also include the results of all tests or monitoring performed and be filed with the agency no later than 45 days after learning about the suspected release. You can use TCEQ's Release Determination Report form to fulfill this requirement of the second report. If there is a confirmed release, additional requirements and corrective action may be required by the Remediation Division. If you have a suspected release, keep all of your release detection records and any reports you have submitted to the TCEQ, including the initial incident report form and the second release determination report form. Any tightness testing requirements and documentation should also be kept proving that you are no longer experiencing a suspected release and the problem has been resolved. In the event of a confirmed release, the Remediation Division may require more information and request a corrective action plan to be submitted. Any documentation of required corrective action taken should also be kept. This slide is a screenshot of the TCEQ Incident Report Form 20097. The top of the page has an email, phone number, and fax number to relay this information to the Remediation Division. They also have a phone number to call in case of an emergency. And this slide is a screenshot of the Release Determination Report Form 0621. This is the secondary report that should be submitted to the TCEQ within 45 days of learning about the suspected release. Facilities should also submit this form with their tightness test results. Okay, moving on to the construction and maintenance section. We will discuss the construction notification form and supporting records that could be kept in this part of the notebook. If you are going to conduct any work on your facility, such as tank installations, removals, repairs to an underground storage tank, you may need to submit a construction notification form. Investigators generally say if you are breaking concrete, you will most likely have to submit this form. It should be submitted at least 30 days prior to any work being done on your system. Remember, in addition to this requirement, you will also have to call the regional office 1 to 3 days before the work is scheduled. If you have any records of construction notifications, you can keep them in this section of the notebook. As far as records, keeping copies of the construction notification form to show that the correct documentation has been submitted before this work was initiated. And if your facility repairs or replaces any equipment, you can keep the receipts or invoices to document the new equipment that was installed. You're required to keep these records for 5 years. This slide is a construction notification acknowledgement letter, notifying the facility that TCEQ received the construction notification form. This letter was for a tank installation and served as a temporary delivery authorization for 90 days. Once the facility construction is complete, they must submit a petroleum storage tank registration to receive their official delivery certificate. And this slide is a screenshot of the construction notification form 0495, which should be submitted 30 days prior to work being done on the system, along with that verbal notification to the facility's regional office 1 to 3 days prior. This form can also be submitted by mail or electronically in steers. Now we'll talk about the operator training requirements for underground storage tank facilities. This has been a requirement since 2012. Each facility needs to have an A, B, and C operator designated for each facility. A/B operators must receive training from an approved training provider on the TCEQ website because training providers had to update their courses to include the new rules that became effective May 2018. After the course, they will receive a training certificate and must be retrained every 3 years. All operators must know what to do in case of a spill, where the emergency shutoff is located, the contact information for the A/B operator, and when to call 911. For operator training records, make sure you have an up-to-date A/B operator certification. Document proof of C operator training and ensure one operator is on site during hours the facility is dispensing fuel. If you are considered an unmanned facility, you must have a sign that indicates the following information on this slide: what to do in case of a spill, where the emergency shutoff is located, when to call 911, and the contact information for the A/B operator. If a facility was in significant noncompliance, they may have to retake operator training. If you need to retake operator training, be sure to keep those records. Your facility could also have an underground storage tank contractor serving as your A/B operator, but you must have a signed written agreement that proves this. This slide is an example of an A/B operator certificate. Just a side note that this is about a 4-hour course, and the A/B operator needs to be retrained every 3 years. This slide shows an example of a C operator training log. C operators can be trained by an A/B operator for a facility regarding what to do if there's a spill, when to call 911, where the emergency shutoff is located, and the contact information for the A/B operator. C operators should also be retrained every 3 years. We are going to discuss the requirements for facilities that may be temporarily out of service. As you can see on this slide, the facility is missing a dispenser and will probably be out of service for a while until they complete any necessary repairs. Another scenario might be that you bought a convenience store that also happened to have underground storage tanks, but you don't plan on selling gas or using the tanks at all. These are just a couple of examples when a facility could put their tank temporarily out of service. The TCEQ allows you to put your tanks temporarily out of service, but there are still requirements. What are these requirements? They include updating your registration within 30 days of the change in status from active to temporarily out of service. It's important to keep the vent lines open and functioning to allow the system to breathe and ensure the tank system is locked and secured. You must also maintain corrosion protection since you still have piping and tank components in the ground. And even though these tanks are temporarily out of service, you must still maintain your operator training for A, B, and C operators and retrain them every 3 years. Now, financial assurance is also required in case there's a release to the environment. You must have financial assurance unless you prove two things: that the system is empty, which according to 30 Texas Administrative Code Chapter 334.54, there's a very specific definition of empty, stating that all liquid has been removed from the system and does not exceed 2.5 centimeters. The second requirement for removing your financial assurance is that you have conducted a site check in accordance with 30 Texas Administrative Code Chapter 334.74. This is basically checking if there has been any releases to the environment or not. Only when your facility meets these two requirements can you remove your financial assurance. What if your facility is temporarily out of service, but it's not empty? Then, in addition to the requirements on the previous slide, you will also have additional requirements because you still have a regulated substance in your underground storage tank system. These facilities need to maintain their annual self-certification and registration, which is done using the TCEQ Form 0724 or electronically through STEERS. If you still have a regulated substance in an underground storage tank, you must also maintain the 30-day release detection records and the annual release detection equipment testing. And since there's potential for a release to the environment, any suspected releases should be reported to the TCEQ Remediation Division. On this slide, I tried to break down the requirements for empty and not empty temporarily out of service facilities. To verify that your facility is compliant, make sure you have the records that are applicable to you. If you have an empty underground storage tank that is temporarily out of service, look to the left of the screen. You need records for tank and pipe and corrosion protection, operator training, any empty documentation, and financial assurance. Remember that if you have an empty tank and proof of conducting a site check, only then can you remove your financial assurance. If your system is not empty, look to the right of the screen. You will need records to show your corrosion protection, operator training, financial assurance, annual self-certification, 30-day release detection records, annual release detection testing results, and documentation of any suspected releases. The last section of the Compliance Notebook addresses the requirements for gasoline vapor recovery throughout Texas. Since Stage 2 should be successfully decommissioned as of August 2018, we are only focusing on the Stage 1 requirements. When you look at the diagram on this slide, focus on the left with the tanker track. This is Stage 1 vapor recovery, which is a control strategy to capture gasoline vapors that are released when gasoline is delivered to a storage tank. The vapors are returned to the tank truck as the storage tank is being filled with fuel, rather than the vapors being released to the air. Stage 1 requirements are based on the facility's location and the facility's monthly throughput of gas that is dispensed each month. There are certain counties that are listed as non-attainment for their air quality and have more strict requirements with this rule compared to attainment counties that have better air quality and fewer requirements. Depending on where you are located and the gasoline dispensed each month, there are different requirements for controlling displaced vapor emissions. These requirements include inspecting for liquid leaks, visible vapors, or significant odors during gasoline fuel deliveries, having a submerged fill tube, vapor control system or vapor balance system, or conducting annual stage 1 testing and submitting the 6C certification for compliance. For more information on stage 1 requirements, please visit the Vapor Recovery webpage to determine your facility's requirement with this rule. There is also a map on the Stage 1 webpage that includes each county and their Stage 1 requirements, depending on the gasoline that's dispensed each month. For Stage 1 documentation, keep records of the gasoline that is dispensed each month, like your 30-day inventory records. And depending on your location, you may need to verify compliance with applicable requirements. This could include documentation of the depth of your submerged fill tube or providing the annual Stage 1 test results. You need to maintain any applicable records for 2 years. This slide shows an example of the Stage 1 vapor recovery test for the pressure vacuum vent cap test. And here is an example of the Stage 1 pressure decay test 102.1. And this slide is an example of the Stage 1 vapor recovery test that includes both of these tests. The important aspect is that these test results say pass. That sums up the underground storage tank compliance notebook requirements and record keeping portion of the presentation. But we do have some resources available if you are looking for information about an underground storage tank facility. You can search the TCEQ Central Registry using the regulated entity number, customer number, or petroleum storage tank ID number. The Central Registry web address is on this slide. Alternatively, you can also contact the TCEQ regional office to look at your files. If you need help locating your regional office, you can contact the Small Business and Local Government Assistance Hotline and ask for assistance. A third option is contacting the Central File Room in Austin. You can submit a records request by email to review your file or request copies of your record. Keep in mind that you may have to pay for copies. If you are looking for blank petroleum storage tank forms, you can go to our forms webpage and search by a form number or keyword. This can be found on the TCEQ Home webpage and click Search Forms. You can also use the link on this slide. If you would like additional assistance, you can always contact your regional small business and local government assistance staff to assist you. This information and other resources are available on our webpage, texasenvirohelp.org. Or if you would prefer, you can speak with a person in our section by calling the hotline number 1-800-447-2827. You can also email psthelp@tceq.texas.gov. And that wraps up our webinar today. Thank you for attending our Underground Storage Tank Compliance Notebook webinar. If you have questions right now, please submit them in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will be happy to answer them.